Hi, everyone. Welcome to Agents on the Rise, a conversation between myself and Christian from Solo. Christian, welcome to the conversation. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Super excited to talk about this. A lot going on.
Great. Do you want to start by maybe giving us a quick overview of Solo and your own role there and what it is you guys are working on?
Yeah, so at Solo, we've been working on modernizing cloud networking for our customers. So this involves technologies like more modern and distributed API gateways and technology like service mesh. But about a year and a half ago, we started seeing our customers starting to adopt LLMs and AI models and building applications around that. And then now more recently into building agents. And so we've been put in this situation where we need to help solve challenges around security, observability, the same things that we were doing in the microservices world and multi-cloud world, but now for this agentic world.
Gotcha. Okay, so yeah, it's a really interesting topic at the moment. I know we're very much at Druva. We specialize in data security and data protection, and agentic AI is become the conversation of the moment. So our customers are asking us how we can use agentic AI to help them be more successful, more secure, but also we're seeing internally. I love the example of seeing our own internal teams using AI and then telling everyone else in the company how great agentic AI is at making their jobs much better. Because then we can, this is how we should give the same experience to our own customers, which is fantastic. So it's a great example. Is there anything in particular that you use yourself from an AI perspective that is really helpful?
Yeah, I mean, it's like I said, it started with our customers trying to bring in and adopt LLMs and put guardrails around that and governance and so on. But just like everyone else, we started using it ourselves, specifically in the customer success aspects, where our customers have deployed our networking technologies, and they end up needing guidance or troubleshooting or help configuring things. And a lot of the times they would, because we work pretty closely. Like when we work with a customer, we bring them into Slack and we have direct conversations between their engineers, our engineers, field team, and so on. But so they would be interacting through Slack and asking questions, posting logs saying, hey, I'm trying to get this to work, or we might need a request for enhancement or whatever. And what we found is if we can pull that information in, pull all of our documentation in, pull in all of the knowledge bases and ticketing systems and all of the history of what we've done in the past, GitHub issues and so on, and if we can build an intelligent system on top of that, then we can significantly reduce the time that it takes to get these customers to be successful deploying and securing their own systems. So yeah, we use it heavily internally.
So I've been playing around with Agent Gateway recently, and that's kind of one of the first my first introduction to Solo. As we're ourselves building MCP frameworks, security is and how we deliver these MCP frameworks is absolutely key. So I started playing around with API or your Agent Gateway. What was the kind of genesis for that in particular, and really having a very much an agent focus? How did it evolve to where it is today?
Yeah, Agent Gateway was an evolution of what we were doing with our AI gateway. So, like I said, a year and a half ago, a little more, but we started working with some large customers, and our primary technology was built around a open source proxy called Envoy Proxy, which had come out of Lyft back in 2015, 2016. And it had sort of evolved out of the previous generation of proxy technologies, for web server type proxy technologies. So Envoy is what we had. It was built to be dynamically controllable so that in a container environment, a cloud environment, and so on, it can take configuration updates immediately without doing file reloads and hot reloads and all that stuff. It had an API to be able to do that automatically. And so we built our mesh, our API gateways, and so on Envoy. But once we started looking at how can we evolve Envoy to meet some of these LLM gateway type use cases, and then eventually MCP, we started running into sort of the limits of the architecture in Envoy. Envoy is really good, just like the reverse proxies in general are really good at taking a REST or gRPC request, applying some rules. Oh, it matches this header, it matches this path, blah, 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 and then route it to a back end, which is made up of a bunch of endpoints that we can treat the same. We'll do some fancy load balancing, but effectively they're all replicas, they're all the same. And it's really good at message comes in, message goes out. And what we were finding with MCP, and MCP having the option of being very stateful, and MCP having this notion that the server can also initiate requests to the client, and then trying to do that and expose MCP servers and even expose virtual MCP servers where you might have multiple backends, but you only want to expose a subset of that to a particular client. So doing that in an architecture that was built for, hey, one message in, one message out real quick, didn't fit. And so that's why we started saying, all right, well, we could make Envoy do this, but we would have to change a lot of stuff. And that's like saying, hey, we have this hardened, mature project that's running at scale, tier 0 and all this stuff. We don't want to make a gigantic shift in that. Plus, all of this stuff in the AI world is going so fast, right? New changes to the existing protocols, maybe new protocols, new models, new attack vectors, all this stuff. We wanted to build Agent Gateway from the ground up to properly support the protocols, make it easier to add new protocols if we need to, and just in general be able to move quickly and keep up with the pace of the market.
So a couple of great points there. And actually, for anyone who's just joined the conversation, thanks for joining us. Myself and Christian here from Solo.io are discussing the agentic rise and how you can really think about security as it relates to agentic AI or AI agents. In our path here at Druva as well, we started very much, probably 2.5 years ago, we started rolling out our first Gen AI capabilities in Copilot form. And it's been accelerating since then. And you mentioned something that really has both caused, it's an opportunity, but also a challenge as well, is the speed at which things are changing. So the likes of, we have OAuth now as being the primary way to handle authorization for MCP. Is that the right tool, do you think, to use? We're just getting into start using that. We had a delegated type approach from the users that were using our AI capabilities to date. Yeah, is OAuth 2 the right way to go? If you were to start from scratch and develop on a blank piece of paper agents in the security, would that be where you land?
It depends on your context, I would say. So, like, we deal primarily with enterprise organizations, big banks, retail, government, and so on. And in those environments, OAuth, the way that the MCP folks are looking at defining their spec, probably doesn't make that much sense. But if you get outside of the enterprise, and you're generally trying to support this public marketplace of providers and consumers, then OAuth probably fits a little bit better there. But for enterprise, I would say that's not the way the enterprises think of things. That's not how they have their security models in place. So no, I think there's a big mismatch between what's happening in the protocol with respect to auth and the way enterprises would expect to consume it.
So is that just like I suppose it's a necessary necessary evil that we're going to use OAuth 2 at the start, which will drive adoption of MCP and A2A, make it just hugely common, and then go back and rework the security protocols to really fit enterprise examples. I know from our own perspective, we have certain components from our API perspective that are OAuth 2 compliant, but we wouldn't have the full suite of user authorization flow because it's just not how a server-server authentication works. So we're looking to build those pieces in to match the current MCP capabilities. but it doesn't feel, as you mentioned, it's not a right fit for how enterprises would use authentication and authorization. But it does feel like it's just kind of a necessary component for a while to make it so common that everyone can use MCPs, and then enterprises will adapt it how they see fit.
I think that's probably, from our observation, that is what people are starting to kick the tires and explore. Mm-hmm. But then we also run into a number of, like, for example, the banking world. There's some organizations, I talked to one yesterday morning, that were like, the security team is not going to let us go forward with that.
Yeah.
And so I think you're right. There's going to be some, I would call it overhead in trying to implement things to kind of match what the spec is saying. But at the end of the day, I think either the real deployments are going to ignore that part of the spec, mm-hmm. or the spec is going to evolve to better fit with what the way that enterprises think about it.
Got it. Yeah, so it feels like A2A. When MCP first came out, it was more about the AI interactivity and not the security aspect of it, which is understandable. It was wrapping tools around what was there. Whereas if we change to the likes of A2A, which seems to be designed from the ground up as a full protocol, that there's a much better security structure in place from A2A. Would you agree?
I think A2A, when they first announced the protocol, said, we want to take securities, into account here. Just do let's try to treat it the same way that we did for APIs and the open API spec.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of what people are looking at right now. Again, like the challenge with OAuth is that OAuth is meant for people who own a particular resource, yeah, or data, and they want to give some third party some limited access to it, or some authorizations to it, mm-hmm. right? So in practical terms, like, I own, Google Calendar is probably a good one. I own my calendar. I own the data on that. That's me. I log in. Yeah. And if I want to give some other app, access to it, I'm not going to give you my username and password, right? So I'll just give you this token that says you can look at my name, my email, mm-hmm. and I don't know, read my calendar, something. Yeah. But in the enterprises, they don't see it like employee number 123 owns this data, and they need to give it access to me. The enterprise thinks of it as, no, we own all the data. We own, mm-hmm. If we're building MCP servers, we own that too. Yep. And it's not about the employee or the user logging in and granting access. It's the enterprises think of it like, we own all this stuff. We're going to write policies about who's allowed to see what. And so that's a big departure from, OAuth for the authorization code and user consent flows for OAuth, which is and dynamic client registration and all that stuff, which is what the MCP spec talks about.
Gotcha. I think there's a certain amount of a challenge with how AI is changing how people interact with data as well. So, certain things we'd see if we look at a classic flow, whether it's a user interface flow or an original Gen AI flow, where someone is going through a step-by-step process, either in a chat-based experience. In our case, it may be someone is doing some compliance work inside of the Druva platform. Maybe they want to do a restore, so it's find server X, do restore to region Y, test the restore has been successful. But now it's very much moving to an objective-based approach. So, I'm a QA user and I want to restore, the last 5 production restores because I want to compare and make sure that there was no differences in how they operate. So the objective-based approach is much broader and hides a lot of the, the granular pieces, which in one sense it might be very easy to say, well, you have access to an environment, you have access to the server, where, typically that historically it's very easy to control that level of access if you think of the likes of IAM permissions in AWS. But as you move to objective-based, I would say policies, I feel like there's something missing there that helps map what is broader objective type approaches to then what the actual tactical pieces under the hood are. And do we need to change how we think about that authorization as well?
Authorization, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Because like you were describing a system, so that these agentic systems differ from, let's say, microservices environments, at least because they are built on non-deterministic AI models.
Yeah.
Right. These models are making decisions about what to do next.
Mm-hmm.
In the microservices world, you've written code, you know what it's going to do.
Yeah.
If you give it this input, you know that it's going to behave this way, and you can build authorizations and policies around that. With the agentic world, it's going to be much more. You don't want to pre-authorize everything up front.
Yeah.
Right, because the agent then can make decisions that you might not agree with, and do things that it shouldn't be doing.
Mm-hmm.
So the big shift there is going to be in being able to build dynamic, context-aware policies, authorization policies, and grants that might tie in to humans, right? You might need to prompt a human saying, hey, this agent is going to do this with this data. Do you consent to that? But it's not going to be, you're consenting to it because you, the employee, own some specific part that the enterprise has no purview over, right?
I wonder, is this going to create an opportunity for perhaps central authorization controls? So instead of let's say in our case AWS having the IAM controls or records of what you have access to in that environment, but then your VMware environment, VMware and vCenter control have the list of what you have access to in that environment. If there's a centralized let's say a third place where you can keep all of this authorization, and the idea being that as agents need more access, that you can grant this all in one place and not have to constantly have to go and say, well, you now need access to go to another place, get consent from the user, so have an elicitation flow that says, we now need access to VMware, can you give us access here? Here's the level of access you need. Where if it was centrally documented or catalog essentially of all of the systems that you have access to, that you could say, well, agent Y, you have level Y access, which means everything in this band. Maybe it's servers in AWS, maybe it's on VMware, etc. And there's different levels of access from that perspective. Is there an opportunity to do something like that, to help?
I mean, the enterprise wants there to be one place that you can do and define everything. Mm-hmm. Now, was that going to be reality? I'm not sure. Mm-hmm. Another model or a way of thinking about that is that you write policies about what agents can do based on what, first of all, who they are, who are they acting on behalf of, and can they get can some trusted authority vouch for them doing that beyond the user. And so you can potentially write permissions or write authorization policy based on those criteria. But yeah, I think ideally in the ideal world, enterprise wants one location where we can manage all policies across everything. I don't think I would love for that to be achievable. I think people are going to work on that. But that would be very difficult.
Startup idea. There you go. Yeah.
There's a lot of people working on it.
Yeah, it's an interesting one that you mentioned. The delegation idea as well. I kind of often think about when we model AI and AI agents. It at the start at least tracks to how someone may be having an assistant, and you say, look, I want you to do this work. Maybe they have access to your calendar to set up meetings for you. Respond to emails. Coordinate travel, which might be your airline loyalty program, all of these kind of things that you have access to, your credit card to pay for various amounts. So that person though is it's very easy to track what they do on your behalf. But when you move into an agent world and you have the ability to have 50 agents that can be spun up and start acting on this delegated access and can supervisory agents grant other agents access to some of their capabilities? Can they say to another agent, here's a small piece of read capability for your Google Calendar because I need you to coordinate with somebody else? The compliance around that is going to get very, very complex very quickly when you move to, from one person to having potentially hundreds or thousands of agents. As it's growing, who knows where that'll end?
Well, so that's why it's incredibly important to, if an agent has been tasked to do something, that you can look at that agent and say, yes, I know this agent has been given authority, authorization to do that, and from whom. And so there are things like evolutions to the various token passing specs that allow us to try to capture that and issue it in such a way, or exchange it in such a way that it can't be tampered with.
Gotcha.
So I mean, there's active research and implementations and stuff going on right now to try to capture and solve that.
Gotcha. So, out of interest, where do you see things in maybe 2 years' time as all of this plays out? Is it very different? I kind of imagine even before MCP came out last November, the AI space was very different from an infrastructure and connecting all pieces perspective to what it is now. Now we have the likes of Agent Gateway from yourselves and Amazon and a few other providers. Do you have any sense for what will it be very different in 2 years' time? Will it be or what will things look like?
At least from my perspective, which is the networking and security observability perspective, I would not be surprised if this whole thing turns out similarly the way that SOAP and REST turned out, which is, hey, we've got this great idea. Let's share services. Let's build this specification, and then in practice, it becomes very unwieldy. And then somebody else comes back, and says, well, that's a good, the premise was good, but the implementation, the way we went about it was not right.
Yeah.
Why don't we simplify things? And then you end up with REST, and then boom, takes off.
Yeah.
I would not be surprised if something similar happens there, like that.
Gotcha. Yeah, having gone through that transition from SOAP to REST, it's not the most enjoyable one. So REST was certainly a positive direction. Yeah, certainly it's hard to know what will happen. Things are moving that quickly, and it is a challenge that you also need to go through the pain of implementing the equivalent of REST. You have to get in and build things on MCP and A2A to learn how it works, or I think you'll be left behind. So there's certainly, you have to do a certain amount, knowing that in 6 months' time there'll be a service that replaces it or a new protocol that will be better. And
just to be clear, I don't mean like MCP is going to be REST, right?
Sure.
Specifically, I just mean there's going to be some simplifications to the protocol. It'll better support, our HTTP transports. It should also better support things like messaging and asynchronous transports. But the way that things are written right now is probably not. It needs to evolve.
Will MCP be the predominant winner out of MCP A2A, or do you think they'll both exist separately? Is it a Betamax versus VHS type debate?
It is that kind of debate.
Whoever's better at selling it.
I mean, I don't see why there needs to be two. I think they're both working on the same problems.
Yeah.
And that eventually there will be some kind of convergence. Yeah, I do think so.
Yeah, there's a lot of duplication.
Exactly.
Our hope, much like what API Gateway does for, as you mentioned, REST as an example, where you can just expose different protocols. The idea, if you can build the data primitives in the background, you use the likes of Agent Gateway or Agent Core from AWS, and you expose it however consumers want to consume it. So maybe that's MCP, maybe that's A2A.
So are you all? I mean, so that's been doing this for a while. Do you are you adopting MCP as an alternative to something you were already doing, or are you adopting MCP net new?
No, so we're what we had built, and this evolution, like I said, started about 2.5 years ago. So we started to build our Druva capability, which essentially was, in our mind, AI had a huge potential to just revolutionize a customer experience. And for us, the idea was intent. When a customer could describe in plain language what they wanted to achieve, we could then make the technology in the background, equal that. Now, it's obviously gone through a lot of iterations, but we've been essentially kind of rolling our own with a lot of work built on AWS Bedrock, using more and more tools and services that have come out to replace handwritten stuff. But as the agents that we've built, they're getting more sophisticated now with the likes of Agent Core. We want we're seeing kind of use cases where customers will want to drop in their own MCP servers. So maybe they're using Druva's client front end, Druva AI, and they want to pop in a Google Drive MCP. So as they are writing queries, they're interacting with the Druva environment, they could just save their conversation directly to Google Drive as an example. So I think we're looking to take an MCP based approach as a starting point. It could be MCP or A2A. If we use a framework that makes it easy to do both, then even better. But both internally and externally, having a way for to make it easier to integrate with any other service, it just seems like the right thing to do. So not that we want to build our own client, but we handle a lot of complex scenarios for customers around data security. So we want to make that as easy as possible. And the reality is, our customers use lots in large enterprises, use lots and lots of different software and SaaS packages. So however easy we can make it to integrate with all of those, then so much better. But even internally, our team builds a lot of the forward-looking AI work, and we'll get internal teams who say, is it possible for us to, can we start utilizing this? We want to drop into our framework, working on a new product feature at the moment. And they're saying they're just going to expose an MCP server from the data. So in that case, if we can just drop it straight in and it starts to work immediately with everything else we have, that makes so much sense. Now, there's a lot of things we haven't that we're thinking about, and you probably see this as well. MCPs at the moment, or even A2As, just map very closely to APIs. We really are trying to evolve them to be, what if you were to write an MCP from scratch without your existing REST APIs in the background, what would it be? What would the tools be like? What would the prompts be like? They likely would be very different and be very much AI focused. So that's, we're trying to approach it from that perspective and make sure that we're building the right MCPs. They'll start off being, very close to our public facing APIs, but they will morph into their own kind of first principle objects that will, can potentially separate as they encapsulate more functionality and capability.
That makes good sense. I think what we're seeing in the enterprise with our enterprise customers is probably the first step, which is we have APIs. We'll treat MCP as a little shim over our APIs, and that will be good enough to get functionality, get data to the AI models. But then we'll slowly refine what those interfaces look like, and then, if it makes sense, see what it means to build the MCP server directly on top of whatever the data functionality is.
Yeah, I see a comment here from Elias just around excited to see how as these MCP or A2A becomes more prevalent and the trust in the applications is there. Excited to see what happens, and I think it's a great point that much like when REST happened, you got all of these applications that were built, even the likes of Zapier as example, that can connect all of these applications through their APIs. So I'm sure we'll see pretty much the same thing when it comes to MCP or A2A marketplaces. Agents.ai is a great example. We can just start connecting all these agents together, so there'll be a second and third order impact of those.
An interesting aspect to that we're working on here at Solo, and we'll start open sourcing some stuff soon, is around discovery and registration. So at least from an enterprise perspective, they're building their own agents.
Yeah.
They are probably going to onboard vendor agents. They probably don't want rogue agents popping up, however that might happen. Whether somebody goes and downloads it, installs it, and so on. So they're probably looking at having a approved list or approved registry of agents, how you connect to them, probably some due diligence, and what make their agent cards don't expose prompt injection and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
That those agents use, or they specify their skills or capabilities, and then they also specify the types of tools that they might rely on, so that in practice, you can discover those agents at runtime based on the skills that are needed to fulfill, a particular task or goal as the agent is working through, a task.
Yeah.
And so agent naming, agent registry, agent discovery will enable us to not only discover things and run and make our agents more autonomous, but also pull in third-party agents or SaaS-based agents, so that we can discover those at runtime too and take advantage of those without having to go in and explicitly wire in and do all that.
It's a great point. That's actually it's quite similar to what AWS did with the marketplace and enterprise contracts a few years ago, where they kind of preset contract rather than having to negotiate with every SaaS vendor. If everyone signed up to the same contract, you knew what you were getting. So if your legal team said, yeah, we're happy with the standard SaaS contract, so if this applies to any vendor in the Amazon marketplace, then you can just essentially start using their software and you'd have the same terms and conditions as you would for any other SaaS vendor. So really interesting idea but to make that automated from an agent perspective.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, Christian, fantastic conversation. Really appreciate the chance to talk to you and get your thoughts and learnings on this. Certainly a lot of excitement. So maybe we get to come back in a couple of months' time and see if any of our predictions have been correct. But thank you very much for joining the LinkedIn Live today.
Yeah, that would be amazing. I really appreciate the invite. It was a great chat. Hopefully it was useful to the audience. And I'd love to chat anytime.
Yeah, and for anyone who has joined, either Christian and Solo or myself at Druva, you get all our details from LinkedIn. If there's any questions that you have, reach out to either of us. It'd be great to hear any thoughts or questions, how you see this going, or if there's anything that we can help with, do reach out.
Absolutely.
Thanks, everyone.